information influences our capabilities, our opportunities, our interests, and our potential. But we are not in control of this information and are influenced by those who control it. The movement is underway to move these controls and influence to the user. What is possible when we are connected and in control? This is the quest. This is the Emergence. Welcome to Emergence, a podcast asking the question, what is possible when we are connected and in control? Today I have Sebastiaan van der Laans on the show, who is founder of Van Ons, the Netherlands' largest digital agency for WordPress, and founder of WordProof, a company employing blockchain technology to timestamp content found on the web. A member of Sebastiaan's team reached out to me a while back to see if I would be interested in having him on the show. At first glance, I wasn't sure why he would be interested, but as I dug into his background and his messaging around fighting for open source technologies and building technology to help verify content found on the web, I couldn't wait to have him on. At the very core of the Emergence is to fight for an open and trustworthy exchange of information between people, business, and government, to build frameworks to serve as a firmament for the application layer to tap into human potential outside the influence of centralized control. As the winner of a $1 million grant from the European Commission's Blockchains for Social Good initiative for his timestamp technology and his innovative push for harnessing the power of open source technology for social good, Sebastiaan seems to be one to follow in helping build a more powerful exchange of ideas and talent for people to drive progress rather than to be driven by it. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on Sebastiaan. And how's it going, Sebastiaan?
Hey, nice to meet you. All good here. How are you?
Good, good. Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming on the show. And so let's just dig in. And I'd like to just have you talk a little bit about your background. Looks like you started working around the WordPress space back in 2008, and you set up your agency. So just kind of give us a little bit of an idea of your background.
Yeah, so Amsterdam based, that's where I'm born, not raised. I'm raised in a small village, Bad Hoefdorp. No one can pronounce that outside of the Netherlands. And how would I describe myself? A nerd, an idealist, and open source nerd. And really here to fight for a trustworthy internet, because I truly believe that to save the world, we need to fix the internet. I run my agency for, 15 years now. It's, we worked for all the big publishers, for big e-commerce stores in the Netherlands and in Europe. And 2 years ago, I started WordProof, where we fight for a trustworthy internet.
Yeah. So now, before we get into the time stamping part of it for WordProof, I want to dig in a little bit about the WordPress side of it, because I've been a fan of WordPress for many, many, many years, and I had a company that we were building a CMS similar to WordPress back in the day. Yeah. So this idea, because I know that speaks well to your WordProof. So WordPress, what attracted you to WordPress? The idea of WordPress.
So WordPress, it's the content management system empowering 39% of all websites on the internet. That's tens of millions of websites. And when I started with WordPress, that was 2008, what you said. And by then, it was the first time that you had a what you see is what you get editor to publish on the internet. For the first time in history, there was a tool, and it was a free tool, an open source tool, to publish on the internet without having knowledge about programming. And that truly revolutionized what was possible on the internet, because until then you needed a programmer, you needed to work with a tech savvy someone to publish. So every entrepreneur, every journalist was dependent on tech people. And WordPress really switched that, flipped that switch. It in a way, and that's the mission of WordPress too, is it democratizes the ability to publish on the internet. And it's a big ecosystem. There are events worldwide. I'm a frequent speaker on WordPress events. I'm a part of the Dutch WordPress community. So I, together with a small group, we organize events. Yeah, it's a wonderful community. And what I learned there is open source software plus communities have the power to become market leaders. And that's really a powerful thing. Once an open source solution becomes really big, you can't compete with it anymore, as all people in the community, in the case of WordPress, the people building WordPress, it's tens of thousands of people, developers, freelancers writing text, hosting companies. They are all committed to promote WordPress. So you can't compete with a company or with a community with hundreds of thousands of ambassadors. And yeah, that's what I learned in the last 1.5 decades, that the power of open source is once the flywheel is on, you can't stop it.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. And I just saw a tweet from you, I think yesterday or the other day, or may have been today. The future is in open source software and communities. And, the Emergence is all about communities. And that's I'm working on an episode. I've trashed it and rewritten it about 100 times because it's so important to me. It's this thought about open source software. And I was going to talk about this later, but maybe this will help set this up. Is that I have an idea about helping reform police departments by using open source technology for police officers to engage with community members more effectively. Yeah. And it's, my thought process about this is that if these training protocols and programs are built for police agencies, and I really don't know, I need to really dig in and find this, but if they're built for profit, if the training is built for profit and it's built on the premise and the platform of profit, then the stakeholders of the police officers and the community members, how invested are they going to be in being able to use the training for the interest of both of them, for the police officers and for the community members. So this idea about WordPress and about open source software and the communities, that's an important part. It's just not about open source. Because when I saw that tweet from you, I said, that's exactly it, because you have to have the community involved, because you can still take open source software but if you have the community as a part of that, as a fabric of it, I believe we can build up better realities for people. And that's kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I fully agree. And open source has downsides too, as many things are decentralized in communities. It's hard to do marketing. It's hard to do marketing right, as when a thing is centralized, when it's a business, you have one person in charge of marketing and one story can be told. With communities, it's harder to organize, but once they're big, they're unstoppable. So there's a small movie on the internet, and it's about how it's a TED talk, or there's a TED talk around it. It's how to start a community, and it's one person doing a crazy dance. I'll send it over to you for the show notes. A crazy dance on a festival, and he's dancing. Then a second one is coming in and following, and one by one you see a whole group. Firstly, the dancing one was the crazy one, but one by one, all the people are getting in the momentum of the dance. And how to start a community. I think if you Google that, you will find it. It's open source communities and software, and combining those principles of open source, it does something amazing for the world, as it makes everything so inclusive. WordPress, for example, everyone, if you're the richest man in the world, or if you have no money at all, if you have a computer, you can run a WordPress website. There's no discrimination there. It's inclusive as it gets.
And that is incredibly powerful. And by making these tools available to everyone, for instance, with the police departments, I mean, if a police department used it and was able to show benefits of engagement in the community, and another police department uses it, now they would probably license it since it's open source. But as opposed to this software being created for profit only, if you build it in an open, and you have other people in the community that are building it and supporting it and saying, hey, I love what's happening with this community in Kansas City or the Netherlands with the police, and they can build that. And then the more of the adoption, it creates more of an organism that can grow and then feeds the system itself. And so that's where on one of my episodes I was talking about cybernetics, and that's part of that, is that feedback loop into the system. And it seems like open source and WordPress is just a wonderful piece of that puzzle. It's not the only solution, because none of these things, I mean, first of all, we're not going to have utopia. My thing is the fact of building towards better, and there's nothing wrong with trying to be better at whatever we do, and more tolerant of all people, and more just, exercise of our power. And it's really not rocket science. I'm surprised we're not further along, but
The great thing is that there's in well-designed communities, and designed is not the right word there, but in communities that function well, there's opportunity, not for a few, but for many. And that's the great thing.
Yeah. And that's what, as I was really researching you, that's what I was coming across. I really saw a lot of those buzzwords there that are just very impactful. And so now let's kind of go along here, and let's talk about the openness of open source. And now let's talk a little bit about the fabric behind that, the blockchain, right? So that framework, the proof of work, and with Ethereum's proof of stake coming up, how is that? Because I know that's kind of the foundation of the timestamping, but let's kind of build on that a little bit, of open source and blockchain and WordPress. And I saw something you were talking about WordPress with the first WordPress with blockchain. So explain how that's going to work with your implementations on WordPress and blockchain.
Yeah, shall I quickly do a setup of what we're working on, or the problem we try to solve, and then we ease in the technologies? So the internet, as we know it, has brought us many good things, but at the same time, it has a deep-rooted issue, and it's trust, it's trustworthiness. And quite obvious that it happened, as trust simply wasn't part of the internet's design. The internet was built to connect computers with computers. And computers, they do not dream, they do not care about power or self-enrichment, as they have no egos, but we humans do. And therefore, all sorts of obnoxious human behavior, as fraud and manipulation and theft, are part of the internet. In the normal society, we have systems to make sure that those behaviors won't thrive. But on the internet, they can thrive, and they echo back on society. So what we say is, to save the world, we need to fix the internet. And simply said, if information impacts your life, you need to be able to see how it changed over time, and who's the sender of that information. And there's an open source technology to do that, and that's blockchain technology. So what we do and what we fight for is making sure that all information that's impactful, so it could be terms and conditions, product information, government information, news outlets, that they are timestamped, that they offer transparency and accountability. And if we have an internet where the vital information is timestamped, then we have a situation, an internet, where what I read is real and I can verify who wrote it. What I create is mine, and I have the proof. And in case of disputes, for example, in e-commerce, we have leverage. We can show what the case was at the time of the timestamp. And through timestamps, really, we can change the internet for the better. We can make trust part of the internet's DNA. As we say, trust comes from two building blocks. A, it's transparency. So how did information change over time? And secondly, accountability. Who really is the sender of the information? And from that moment, the internet is about connecting people to people without the noise. And through timestamps, we can shift from the unregulated internet really to what we call the trusted web.
Yeah. Now,
that's
so
the
with
introduction.
Yeah. So with the blockchain, so we're blockchain runs off the fundamentals of building blocks through the style of distributed ledgers. So how does that? I don't want to go too deep into the technology, but how does that construct apply to timestamping? Why is that? So why can't you timestamp without blockchain? And what's so special about blockchain for your timestamping model?
Yeah. So you can see blockchain as a public database. So what we do, if you publish an article on your website, what we do is at the moment you timestamp, or what you would love to do, for example, a news outlet with a journalist or you as a center of information, what you want to do is bringing it to the notary saying, hey, this is what I published and I am really me. But a notary is expensive and costly. So what you can do with a public database like a blockchain is really make a fingerprint of the content. So you have a content, you have an article, you have a headline and the body of the article. And you can make a hash of it, a unique fingerprint. And if only one character changes in the headline or in the text, the fingerprint is totally different. What we do is we pick that fingerprint and we put it in a blockchain transaction. And with putting it in the transaction at the moment of the blockchain transaction, you can prove that the information existed in that specific moment of the blockchain transaction. So it's the power of a notary, but then fast and cheap. It's placed in a second and it costs a few cents instead of what a notary costs. So, what's interesting to know is that many have heard of blockchain because of the Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a famous implementation of the technology, but blockchain really was invented 30 years ago in 1991 by Stuart Haber and Scott Sternetta for timestamping information, for proving the integrity of information. That was what blockchain was invented for. So what we do at WordProof is doing the initial use case for blockchain technology and bringing it to all vital information on the internet.
Yes. Now, as far as the authority of it then, so the author of that content, when you timestamp that, does that relate to verifying authorship of the individual and the server from where it actually comes, or is there thoughts of that in the future to be able to create that true trust? Because if somebody in the 2016 election is sending out articles on Facebook from a Russian server, that information is good for the user to know, to determine if that's possibly not real. So does it timestamp only on the fact of time and date, or does that in the future attribute to other measures?
This is an excellent question. So there are two aspects. Number one is the proof of existence. So if you just timestamp with a blockchain address, you can prove the existence of the information and therefore prove the integrity of documents. The second very, very, very interesting part is connecting an identity to information. You can do that on several levels. So you could timestamp with an anonymous blockchain address, but you can also choose to connect identity to information. So for example, your government identity. So if a government identity is connected to a blockchain address and you publish and you connect your blockchain address to it, your reputation is at the line as people can verify that you are you. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of a tricky thing. Who would connect their government identity to the content they publish? Not a lot of people are willing to do that, right? Then you have some steps in between. So, I will describe it for audio. So you have no verification on the lowest. So no identity on the lowest, and you have full-fledged government identity on the highest. There are some steps in between. So, for example, if you connect a LinkedIn account to your blockchain address, then you're probably a human if it has a certain amount of connections, if it has a certain number of connections, if it exists for a few years, then it's probably that person. Then you can have another tier that's, for example, connecting a Twitter address. You can have multiple Twitter accounts. You can have work with a name that doesn't reveal your identity. So you have all sorts of levels of identity that you can choose to verify your blockchain address with. And there comes the catch. So how we educate search engines, how we educate social media platforms is, if you let's say for a search engine, for example, what we educate search engines on is the more transparency you take or you show as a sender of information, the higher information should rank. If you put more identity, so more accountability on the line, the higher you rank. The more accountability, the higher you rank. If you look at social media, for example, if you timestamp your content and you don't put your identity to it, you can, of course, publish all information on the internet, but it can't spread further than your friends. If you put a bit of identity, you can publish and it will spread across your friends and friends of friends. But for your content to go viral, it must have a certain level of identity. For example, on LinkedIn, or maybe even higher on government level, if you want to spread very far. So what that does is there will always be a freedom of speech. Any content can be published on the internet, but for content to reach really far and go viral, you need to put identity on the line. So there's freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach, which will solve massive problems on the internet.
I love that. I hadn't seen that one yet. That's great. That's great. And and I noticed that because you have a partnership with Yoast, who is the SEO plugin for WordPress. And so a big part of timestamping right now, obviously at this stage, is to be able to deal with the ranking of search. And that's something that I've been fighting for a very, very long time, is that the feed, this linear feed where we're just scrolling up and down and we're being fed. So when we're being fed information based off of popularity only, that if we don't have other metrics, and my thing is I argue for tuning. I think even for advertising, we should be able to tune our own advertisements. And I've written an essay about that. But that's a key. And this is what attracted me to you, is that key part of verification, of provenance, of our experience, of where did it start? Where are the origins? And if it was changed, you raise your hand and there's the change. That's fine. People can change things, but it's giving us more information about the context of the experiences, because I don't really consider it as information. It's experiences. Everything that we're sharing and exchanging on the web or through applications, or we're sharing experiences. And what that does is that models who we are and what we believe, and all this noise of things that are influencing us on directing us to believe one thing or another. You're hit so many times. I mean, I don't necessarily blame some people when you're hit with misinformation so much. And at some point it's like, I'm tapping out, okay, I'll believe it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think you're part of that. That timestamping is kind of a fundamental element of that. It's not the only element, but it seems like in the chain of events that needs to happen is that we do need to be able to take a deep breath and verify these experiences.
Yeah. And that's really, if you see a news outlet, for example, you have the headline, you have the body of the article, and sometimes it says last edited 3 hours ago. You could say, wow, that's transparent. But you could also say, hey, what was there 3 hours ago that I'm not allowed to see anymore?
Yeah.
You could be suspicious too. So for example, the Ipsos research 2019 about trust in the internet says that in Europe, these are European numbers, but the US is not, doesn't differ too much. It says 86% of all people have fallen for fake news at least once. And 29% of Europeans were suspicious of the internet, regularly questioning, hey, is this legit or not? It's really hard. Not only for my parents or my younger brothers, but for me as well. In many cases, as I'm quite tech savvy, I'm on the internet for maybe 20 years. Even for me, it's hard to see if for a smaller web shop, for example, is this legit or not? It becomes harder and harder every day.
Yeah, it does. And then really, my frame of reference is everything that I hear, I just search. I do a search and I go for 2 or 3 sources. And, that takes a lot of work. And
it takes it takes you being educated on that it's necessary to do so. But many people, if you want to have an inclusive society, everyone needs to be able to take part in that. And you and I know that it's important, but not everyone knows.
Absolutely. And there's the dissemination of some of these tool sets. And that's the thing that I'm fighting for, because that's the core of the emergence. I mean, the emergence is more or less about creating awareness of people like you and the technologies and the thought experiments that are going on. And actually, in 2022, I'm planning on traveling to Europe to uncover some of these things for myself, because I got to tell you, I'm just noticing a lot is going on in Europe. With Tim Berners-Lee, a lot of his dev team with the Solid Pods are from the Netherlands. You were talking about government. I don't know if you're probably familiar with this, but the Solid Pods with Flanders, Belgium are doing using a test course of using Solid Pods to engage citizens in Flanders, Belgium with their government directly. So I don't know. Are you familiar with that at all?
No, but I'll definitely research it.
Oh, and I follow the Solid Pod team on GitHub. And I've written an essay and I shared it with the team that authored this study in Flanders, and they got back with me and I wrote another essay on it. So I'll send you some of those resources. But the things the thing you're talking about with verifying identity in government, it just kind of triggered my brain there that maybe that's something that you should look into, because that's what they're doing. They have one of the things that I'm a big proponent of is direct democracy and utilizing these tools for people to engage with legislation directly, as opposed to the proxies of representatives, not to decide on legislation, but to be aware of it. And like you're talking about how people aren't aware of things, is that we need to build and use these open source technologies to really engage people around the awareness of what exists, the legislation that's being, legislation that is going to affect your commute, legislation that's going to affect the education of your child, legislation, not the politician who's posturing about what they might do for this. And the politicians are politicians. They're not all bad. They're not all good. It's just what it is. I mean, there are representatives, but digging and having that connection to make people aware of the legislation and the things that are going to impact them, and making them aware of content and the provenance of that content and where it starts and what has happened and who edited it. Not the only fact that it's been edited, but who is edited. Yeah. And as we enter into IoT and information of things, is that, you have sensors that are collecting information from farms and from haptic devices. And if it's collecting it from me and it goes somewhere else, well, who is going to take that and do what with it and sell it to whom? All these things we're really going to have to talk about. And a lot of it has to do with awareness and understanding.
Yeah, and it's really about making the internet about connecting people to people instead of computers to computers. And if you can verify that the one who's sending you information, it could be in your timeline, it could be whatever, then if you can verify that it's really a person and hold that person accountable, that will change the internet massively. As from that moment, in normal life, in society, we can't easily steal or manipulate each other. And we will bring the checks and balances and the possibility to keep people accountable. We will bring that to the internet, and all in an open source manner. So it will change the internet for the better. Make it inclusive. Make it a place where my parents can feel safe, where my kids, possibly my kids in the future, can feel safe.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. And so the last leg of this, as we wrap up in the next 10 or so minutes, is I'm also working on an episode around the potential of exploring the potential of labor. And something really struck with me as I was really digging into this worker proposal system, right? So that's a fundamental thing, because you're talking about, we're right now we're talking about the user of information, but there's also those workers of information that are going to be building these things and who are inspired to want to build them. And this thing that you're talking about with your worker proposal system, and the inclusive, is that you're bringing more people in to build these better tools to build the better reality. And that's like Douglas Engelbart was a major fan of him, the mother of all demos, back in the 60s. He was talking about bootstrapping, where you build tools to help people build tools to help people become better. And
Yeah.
this worker proposal system to me. So if you don't mind, if we can kind of riff on this a little bit, what is this
Yeah,
worker
for sure.
proposal system, and what does it bring to this future you're talking about?
Yeah, so they're experiments, but the worker proposal system, what it does is it makes in a community, in a blockchain community, often there's a token has value, and there's some inflation. So as a blockchain has maybe $1 billion in value, there's 1% inflation that goes in a fund to work on new ideas. So 1% of a billion is 10 million in a fund. What happens then? Maybe you have a million people in that community who hold some of those tokens, some of those 1 billion tokens. What you can do, what a work proposal really is, it's ultimate democracy. So what I can do is to say, hey, I need $1,000 a month as a freelancer, and I will build, in the coming 3 months, I will build this thing that makes our community better. And what then happens is that the token holders can vote on that proposal. So will 1K per month for the coming 3 months go to this person that wants to make something to grow our community? And it's really an elegant, totally open source way to fund innovation. It's experimental, but yeah, search for it. Worker proposal systems. It's the ultimate democracy way of funding stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. And on my show notes, I'll share all the things I've discovered on you and these links and information for sure. So if anybody wants to research more on you, which I highly recommend they do, they go into that. And so I kind of skipped over to the fact about this when we're talking about funding things, this European Commission award. How did you come across that?
Yeah, so there was a competition and it was called Blockchains for Social Good, as you mentioned, and that's what I like on Europe's approach. Europe is really decentralized, so if they want to start with innovation, they really organize a competition around it. Blockchains for Social Good, 176 participants from over 40 countries. And our proposal to building a trusted web through the blockchain timestamps, holistic ecosystem, we won that competition. We had the highest possible rate, so 29.5 out of 30 points. And yeah, we got 1 million euros funding for the company. That was great. But the greatest thing was not the money, but really the ability to bring people from Europe inside the company and consult with them and taking them to meetings. So yeah, we won that prize. It kickstarted the company. The company was with 5 before the competition. Now we're a team of 9. And yeah, it really validated the mission of WordProof, which is to build a trusted web. And yeah, it really validates the vision. So blockchains for social good. What I like on the social good thing is that open source can really change lives for the better. And for the internet, it's what I said, it has a deep-rooted issue, and open source is the solutions can only come from the open source space. Otherwise, there always needs to be a direct business model. And yeah, the problem with the internet, most problems on the internet came from direct business models.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Okay, so I've been working on this in my head as a thought experiment. Is that anything to do with communication technology that empowers people with information? I really fundamentally believe that it should be derived from open source and through community engagement. Now, I know that that's really hard to do because you have a lot of companies making billions of dollars, and they can still make money because we would license it to them. And just because it's open source doesn't mean there's no way to make money. But even with education, and don't even get me started about the American educational system. And believe me, and I've talked about this before. I'm an American. I'm very proud to be American, but I'm so proud that I care about America, and I'm American, and I also a part of the world. So those don't have to be mutually exclusive, in my opinion. But there's some things that fundamentally need to be worked on. And this, I've read a bit on Adam Smith and the foundation of the free market, and I just seen that we've lost our way. And that's why I'm interested in going to Europe to really uncover some of these things, because I'm sure there's a lot of people like you that are doing amazing things. So this idea of how far can that go with open source in your mind and communities? I mean, should our software that we're communicating with be open source? All of it?
I don't think so, but there must be. The hard thing with open source is that most people in open source are terrible at marketing. Most communities are terrible at marketing as it's so decentralized. So what you see when you work with WordPress, for example, of other open source software, you can, as a site owner, see what's under the hood if there's data sent to parties. And so you can really, as a site owner, check the integrity of the software, the platform you work with. As a visitor of those websites, you don't have that integrity. You don't have the opportunity to check it. So you hope that there's integrity in the sender of information, in the seller of products, but you can't verify. And what you can do with, in this case, blockchain technology and blockchain timestamps is offering the ability to verify integrity. So it's kind of a layer of trust over the internet. And not everything should be open source, as that will slow down innovation in the world massively. But it brings something, in this case, the timestamps bring something new to the table in a fast and pragmatic way. It works today. It's cheap, it's fast, it's massive value for search engines, for citizens in planet Earth, and for all. So adding, in this case, the timestamp, so adding the open source technology here brings enough value to make a big step forward. Because the hard thing, if we would assume, as a thought of experimental thought, that everything needs to be open source, it will be a world with great benefits, but it's hard to get there.
So then thereby people will be reluctant to even try. So in more of the baby steps of WordPress has 39% of all the web. So, and I agree with that. And that's why sometimes I'm careful about how I articulate these things, because and I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people of my ideas for the last 20 years. Like, that's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. It's too big. And, but that's why I'm so intrigued by what you're doing, is that it's very specific. It's very important. One of the other things I'm thinking that we really big for, which is you have a plugin for GDPR for WordPress that you've built.
Yeah.
Because policy is incredibly important in this world that should be built. Because if we don't have the policy and the reinforcement, and where something is illegal to take advantage of, then we can build all the tools we want and they're just going to step all over it. So in just a couple of minutes, maybe that GDPR, because that's really interesting. So you built that plugin. Talk about that just a little bit.
That's a great example of business models in open source. So I founded an agency, a WordPress agency, and today we do multiple, it's a remix of all sorts of open source software. And in 2017, we had the wish to do a massive contribution to open source software. What happened? Europe introduced the GDPR. And everybody, I always start at conferences with the question, who here in the room loves GDPR? Everybody starts laughing. Nobody likes GDPR because the execution was terrible. But the intention, and that's where my love for Europe as a continent started, the intention behind GDPR is wonderful, as it says, hey, citizens aren't able to protect their data, so we make organizations responsible for the protection of data instead of the individual. And so the intention behind GDPR was wonderful, but the execution was not so sexy. What we saw is all site owners worldwide, nobody wants to pay for being GDPR compliant. And we had the wish to build a great open source tool, free forever. So we thought, okay, if nobody wants to pay for being GDPR compliant, what if we make GDPR tooling for all website owners in the world and we offer it for free? Wouldn't that make us a cool company? So we made all sorts of GDPR tooling. We launched it a few months before the GDPR deadline, which was in May 2018. And what we saw was after a week, 10,000 downloads. A few weeks later, 50,000 downloads, 100,000 downloads. Today, it has 2 million downloads and I guess 200,000 active websites using the tools. And what did it cost us? Maybe 100,000 euros over the years in developing it. Was there a direct profit? Not at all. But every customer who asked about, hey, GDPR, what do you do with it? Oh, we have a plugin running on 200,000 websites. There's the answer. Then we had the deal. Also for recruitment, it's really hard to find good developers. But from the moment you have an open source tool with such a big amount of users, a big user group, then a developer says, okay, your agency is way cooler than all other agencies. So I start working with you. So there's no direct business model, but indirectly open source starting with giving, it brings so much to companies.
Yeah, and that's amazing. And then effectively, by having a GDPR plugin on a website allows that content provider to be compliant with GDPR. Is that effectively what that does?
For the technical part, so there's a lot of processes you need to have in place in the company itself, but the technical tooling, so bringing a good workflow for the requests that citizens can have, it's tooling for all that kinds of requests. Okay. And how we educate the regulators, for example, Canada reached out, Germany reached out, the European Commission, we're talking to them regularly. Firstly, there was the unregulated internet. Then there was the GDPR internet, where there were a bit more data rights for all citizens. And then a logical next step is the trusted web, where all information that reaches the citizen, the individual, all vital information must be A, transparent, and B, accountable. Who is the sender of that information? So a trusted web is good, and you reach that through timestamping. So timestamping is good for policymakers. We expect them to make it mandatory for some sorts of content. Yeah. Europe has a reputation in fighting for a better internet, and timestamping in an open source way, it really builds a trusted web. It makes, in an open source way, transparency and accountability part of the internet. So firstly, regulators, they will enforce it in the coming years, at least for terms and conditions and government information. And then one by one, all information will follow. Secondly, search engines will reward transparency and accountability through timestamps, as it solves massive problems in the search engine space. And the advertisers, for example, the next step will be that advertisers will demand it. Consumers will demand it. They will ask, hey, what was there 3 hours ago that I'm not allowed to see anymore? So, and then the site owners, they will do it as the regulator are asking them. Social media and search are rewarding them. So yeah, the flywheel is starting currently. Millions of pieces of content will be timestamped in the coming months, and we all have contracts signed, so that will happen. And one by one, all websites will go over, and a trusted web will arise. Yeah, and that is beautiful. That is beautiful. I'm so happy that you guys discovered my podcast, and because this is exactly what the Emergence is about. This is 100% these specific tool sets, these specific. And for the fact that what you did on the GDPR is that with the money that you were making with your agency, you was able to put some of that for the greater good. And if we're going to build a better society, that type of mindset is going to need to be in place. And why can't that be viral? That's kind of that's one of the things. But that's the people at Yoast. Yoast is the search engine tool. Everyone who works with WordPress knows about Yoast. Yoast, it's Toast with a Y. The founders of Yoast are investors in the WordProof company and in the Trusted Web Foundation. So their company, they have more than 10 people working full time on making WordPress better tooling. So that's about 10 or 9% of all the people working at the Yoast company. And they say, hey, it makes WordPress better, but also for them there's a business sense as well, because they make WordPress better. There are more users of WordPress, so a bigger group that can use their tools as well. So it's wonderful how companies that have 1 or 2 legs in open source, they add so much to the world, but also to their own business. But it's more of a long-term game.
Yeah, and that's what I really wanted to start exposing, because it's that purpose over profit. It's not just profit, and really the fundamentals of the markets were not created for just profit, because there's bigger things. Because when you have a healthier society, you have less costs. And when mentally, that's one of the things with Emergence, is that right at the direct center of the Emergence is mental health, and how can these technologies be utilized to help people with anxiety and depression and manic disorders and homelessness. That's something that I'm going to start attacking with and talking about on my podcast and finding people. So, by the way, if you ever know of anyone that might be interested in coming on and to be able to add to these things, please believe me, let me know, and I'd love to have them on, because this is the idea of to uncover these things, and people don't know. There's a lot of people that don't know that people like you that are doing these things, and people like Yoast. I mean, it's about awareness, and that's what I want this to be a vehicle for. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on. And finally, I always ask us, do you have any questions for me at all?
Oh, where do you see the world in 2025? What will be the biggest 2 things that will be achieved through open source software?
Well, I think the AR is about to hit. And if Apple, I'm not sure about their times, because Apple's going to drive the augmented reality. I'm a huge fan of augmented reality. But the problem that I have is that we can use with VR, virtual reality, mixed reality. If we don't break this centralized control, we are going to face Black Mirror. So I do think that we're going to start to augment our perception of the world around us, which could be a wildly great thing, because you could have a kid in Harlem finding a teacher in somewhere in India and being able to be immersed in education, and they're walking them through a forest and talking about trees. But if there's an ad that pops up for Michelin tires because the teacher was searching for tires or talked about something, you see what I mean? So I think that in the next 4 years is what I would like to see. I would like to see this really big push for open source, for breaking the binds of the centralization of, and a lot of that has to do with competition. Here in America, I'm here in Avondale, Arizona, and we have 2 broadband providers. These are some fundamental things that need to be fixed, that are going to have to be opened up, because we need more competition to be able to drive some of these better realities. The advertising, I would love to see the advertising ad model just completely broken apart, and allowing people to be able to discover the ads that they're interested in, and the providers. And it could be an advertiser for toilet paper, but they find out that the CEO is providing money to help forests in Brazil, or it's something that really relates to them. Give people more abilities to engage with information outside of what the algorithms are telling them what they should discover. And I do see, in the next, I do believe, with what Tim Berners-Lee is doing with Solid Pods, what you're doing, Mark Nadal, that I interviewed on GunDB, there's a lot of, I just see a lot of movement. And I've been chasing these ideas since 2000, basically, 1999. Wow. And I was always frustrated because just the technology was not there. I fundamentally think in the next 4 years the technology is here and we're running out of excuses. That's my thing, is that it's here and let's build it.
And it's there are two sides of that equation. So firstly, society needs to adopt, but we need to be sexy enough as open source. It must not be just a choice by heart, as that limits the adoption rate. Open source really must do better. And that's, for example, WordPress. They totally reinvented the editor, not to be a good open source editor, but by being the best fucking editor in the world. Sorry for that word.
No, that's okay.
We must be better as open source. We must not only invest in good technology, we must have good communicators. So to the people listening, if you're amazing, that's the hard thing with open source. Often people think that they can only contribute to open source if they are technologists or developers. The open source space needs better marketeers, better communicators. So if you're listening and not contributing to open source, and you're an amazing communicator, amazing marketeer, amazing documentation writer, join open source projects. And would that be a good call to action?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm noticing a lot of my audience is actually almost half of my audience is coming from India. I've been noticing that on my ads. It's amazing. So, but yeah, absolutely. And I hope to grow it. And that's a great call to action. And again, I can't tell you how much, Sebastiaan, I appreciate you coming on the show. And what I love is I love to learn, and I love to learn what people are doing. And you've definitely filled that mission. There's no doubt about it. And I wish you much success. And I will definitely send you the podcast once it's up. And please feel free to share any resources moving forward, and I'll share with you what I learn. And thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. And let's build the trusted web together with all of us.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again, and you have a good one.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay, bye.